wanted to share. I haven't read this in years. This is a talk that I had to write when I was a leader in Alpha 16 years ago, so half my life ago.
Oh, in Alpha, not Search?
Search, I got mixed up, sorry. So, the junior in high school. So, it's called Baby Sister.
Oh.
My father awoke me at 6:15 a.m. that morning.
That's all it closed. Keep going.
Okay. My father woke me at 6:15 a.m. that morning. He told me that he and my mother were going to the hospital, so my mother was going to have a baby. I expected this to happen soon, so I didn't give it much thought at the time. Instead, I fell back asleep until I had to wake up for school. My first 2 classes went as they always did. I didn't give much thought to my mother and my baby sister who would soon be born. The idea of having a baby sister seemed so unrealistic that I really did not think that it would actually happen. I told only a few friends. I tried to pretend that I was very excited, but my friends seemed to be more excited than I was. I know that I felt like that because I subconsciously suppress my feelings more than I can help. That's interesting, because I still do that. At that time, I had only cried a few times since I was only a small child. I suppose that's normal for a young man like myself. After the 15-minute break, I went to my next 2 classes, Morality and Spanish 3. By then I had started to think about my mother and my sister-to-be. I was starting to get excited. I was thinking about how exciting it would be to have a baby sister to play with and to love. I thought that it would be a good practice for when I would eventually have children of my own to raise. My excitement grew during those 2 classes. I told almost everyone that I saw.
No.
No. And they got me more excited, because I realized how very excited they were for me. At lunchtime, I hurried to the front office. My father had told me in the morning that he would call the front office as soon as the baby was born. It was noon, and I thought the baby would have been born by then.
And she was. Stupid Ron.
When the people in the office told me that they knew nothing about my baby sister being born, I had a strange feeling in my stomach. I had no idea what I was feeling at the time, so I shrugged it off and went to class. My next class, chemistry, was my hardest class of the day, Mr. D. It also happened to be the most stressful class of the day. The class was difficult to understand because the material was hard to grasp and because I had something else on my mind, namely my baby sister's birth. Many different feelings ran through my mind, and I could not be sure what those feelings were at the time. I went to American history, my last class of the day, feeling very confused. I sat down before class, not talking to anyone, only thinking about my sister. She was not the only person of whom I was thinking. I was thinking of my mother. I did not know why she came into my mind at the time. All that I knew was that I was going to leave school and find out what was happening at the hospital. I got up and told my teacher I needed to go to the hospital to see my baby sister. He gladly excused me from class. As I drove to the hospital, I began to worry. Then, I was not worried about my sister. Instead, I became more and more worried about my mother. For the first time, I had the thought that my mother, my only mother, might be hurt during this childbirth. She was 41 years old, and everyone knows that older women have more problems during pregnancy than younger women do. When I got out of my car, I started walking. Soon after that, I picked up the pace. I was practically running when I finally got to the hospital. When I asked the information desk what room it was, which Mrs. Gavigan was staying, a woman said to me with a smile, "Congratulations, Mr. Gavigan, you have a baby girl."
That is funny.
On any other day, I would have thought that was funny, but that day I could not laugh. How can a person laugh when he's worried about his family? As I went up the elevator, I forgot about my baby sister. I focused all my attention on my mother. This was new to me. For the past 9 months, the only thing that my family and I had worried about was my sister-to-be. We all knew she would be different. She was going to have Down syndrome. At that time, I put my thoughts concerning my sister aside. I realized that my mom may have been hurt or possibly killed during the delivery. Before that moment, I had never considered my mom ever being hurt. She had always been there for me. I'd always believed that she would always be with me. I'd taken her for granted. When I finally reached the floor that she was on, I was shaking tremendously. I was on the verge of tears. When I walked towards my mother's room, I passed my grandmother. I hardly paid any attention to her. Her smiling face did not reassure me. All that I wanted to see was my mother. When I went into the room, I remember seeing my grandfather in his chair against the far wall.
Everything's fine, Joe. Everything's fine.
Sorry.
I finally saw the one who I'd been so anxious to see. My mom was lying on the hospital bed with the biggest smile I'd ever seen. It actually seemed so big because I needed to see it so badly. When I saw her, I could not control my feelings any longer. I started to cry. I rushed to hold my mother. When I hugged her, I cried even more. I cried because I was so happy to see her. I'd never felt so excited and so secure with anyone than I did that moment. I felt so secure knowing that she was still there for me. As I hugged her, I continued to cry. I remember my grandfather saying to himself with a smile, "This is great. This is great." That day will always be very special to me. It was then that I realized how much I loved my mother. I now know why I was nervous all day that day. Since then, I appreciate my mother more. I do not take her for granted like I used to. I still do not tell her that I love her every day, only occasionally. I think that she'll always know, because of those 5 minutes we spent together crying in the hospital.
Good.